Welcome to the Bros of Gardening. I'm Mike Westfall, your host, and I'm joined by my co-host, Daniel Van Dyke, and our producer in the background that you won't see his face, but you hear his voice is our producer, Alex. So welcome to this podcast where today we're going to talk about low maintenance gardening / landscaping. I'm Mike Westfall. I'm from the retail side of a garden center, and he's from the landscape side. So Daniel and I will have these varying opinions and different viewpoints of low maintenance gardening as we get into this topic. So it's a pretty interesting one.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, I think it's one of those things where, this has become probably our biggest request. I mean, when we walk, kind of how we handle appointments as we go on and we kind of ask the customers to kind of gain as much information as we can. And I think low maintenance gardening, I would say far and away is the number one request that people ask for. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I mean, who wouldn't? I mean, it's, other than people who really do enjoy gardening, which, obviously we do, but, a lot of people aren't going to want to do a ton of maintenance and put a lot of time, and especially on the landscape side, if you're having somebody else come out and install it for you, you might not necessarily want to do, hours of work each week. And so low maintenance becomes a big part of that. And that's something that we have, over the years kind of figured out different plants, different varieties of plants and different kind of tricks of the trade to try to create as low maintenance of a garden and landscape as you can.
Yeah. And I think, everybody's probably got a different opinion of what a low maintenance garden is or what a low maintenance landscape is. I think it comes down to time for sure. It's how much time do you want to spend in your yard maintaining it and watering it and pruning it. But it could be because you're in a fairly dry area.
Sure.
And you need something that's very water wise. There's a lot of different, different ways to kind of approach the low maintenance gardening. I think you have the best saying, which is a low maintenance garden. And there's no such thing as a low maintenance garden.
Yeah. There's certainly no such thing as a no maintenance
garden. That's right.
Yeah. And that's what we always tell people too and that's really kind of what the first question we have for people is, we can design it, we can do whatever the case may be, recommend different plants, like you said. I mean, depending on where they're at, whether they're, on the water, different types of things will affect your plant palette. But at the same time, I think the most important thing you need to decide for yourself is how much time and effort do you want to do it. And once you figure that out, you can kind of build around that. But that being said, there is no such thing as no maintenance. I mean, even artificial turf, which sounds like the lowest maintenance thing you could do. If you don't blow the leaves off of it, if you don't keep the artificial turf clean, then it's going to give you issues. And so even what seems like it could be completely no maintenance, it still is not truly no maintenance. And we just like to try to warn people of that because we don't want to set them up for failure, obviously.
For sure. And we'll get into some specifics on the plants and different types of things there. We mentioned it in our original podcast that kind of was an introduction of who we are and kind of how you might get into gardening. And I'll bring it up again, which is talk to your local garden centers.
Sure.
I mean, they know what's going to be the low maintenance in your area. They know your zones. We mentioned zones. We're in southeastern Virginia. McDonald Garden Center is, and that's zone 8. So your USDA plant hardiness zones are very, very important. Absolutely. So whenever you're doing some plant research, know which zone you're in. You can look it up. It's very easy to find it on just a simple Google search. But know the zone that your plants are in, and you'll find that a lot of areas throughout the United States sell very similar plants.
Sure.
So a lot of the topics and a lot of the specifics that we're going to talk about when we get into plants will be plants that you've probably heard of,
sure.
Especially in the middle part of the country as you run all the way across the states, but even down into Florida and up to, Boston and Massachusetts. Sure. I mean, there's tons and tons of plants that we have found that are very desirable. One, because they could be low maintenance, but also because they offer something. And so, everybody knows hydrangeas and azaleas and hollies and boxwoods. And some of those might be low maintenance. Some of them might be more maintenance. And we'll kind of talk about that a little bit.
Well, and I think it's a good point too about the local garden centers, just because, I know when I worked in trees and shrubs, and obviously you worked retail for a long time.
Right.
That was one thing, I kind of would see the customers would come in and they'd have issues with certain plants. Right. And so I would start to think, okay, maybe these plants aren't the lowest maintenance, because you see these plants over and over again having different. So that's kind of how I developed my low maintenance plant palette, was through what has issues and what do you never really have issues with. And so to me, that's kind of, through the years working through it and working with different customers, that's kind of how I developed kind of my hot list of plants when we're really trying to go for low maintenance.
Cool, yeah. And I think Alex maybe has a question for us.
I kind of want to touch on that hot list of plants. What are your favorites?
So, wow, I mean, obviously I have a bunch of them. But just to give you a few to kind of that will solve different things for you. So if you're going for like an ornamental tree or something like that, obviously a lot of people have probably heard of Japanese maples. Japanese maples, from a maintenance standpoint, they're very hardy. They don't have a ton of issues. They don't have a lot of disease issues, but you still get, kind of that ornamental, focal point feel from that can really be like a centerpiece of the landscape.
And they don't get huge either.
No, I mean, yes, if you can find ones that will fit kind of any size or really any dimensions you need.
Right.
So that is kind of, the way I, kind of look at landscape is you kind of find your focal point and then you build off of that.
Yeah.
And we'll kind of talk about layering and some different things like that. But, then, moving into some evergreens and some different shrubs that I've really liked. One that maybe some people haven't heard of is called a Goshiki osmanthus.
Yeah. We've talked about this one plenty of times.
We've talked about this one quite a bit. It's a nice variegated. It's called a false holly. So it looks like it could be in the family of a holly, but it is a little different. But you get a nice variegated look year round. And I mean, I think anytime you can get that pop of color out of just foliage,
right?
You don't have to wait for it to bloom for a couple months out of the year. You get that year round.
Yeah.
So while it doesn't have a showy bloom time or flower, you get kind of those characteristics throughout the year. If you are interested in some flowers, one of my favorites is Sasanqua camellias.
Yep.
Again,
awesome plant.
Fairly hardy, evergreen. It blooms kind of, late fall into early winter, which is great just because, that's when
nothing's
a lot of things are going dormant. Your perennials are going dormant. So having something to give you kind of that pop and show of color in the garden, it's just really nice, to have that time of year. And again, it's very low maintenance, very hardy. There's a lot of different sizes and colors you can go with to kind of fit different bills.
Yep.
And then lastly, one of mine that is, can get a nice pop of color throughout the summer is the dwarf butterfly bush. Lo and behold, I think is one of the varieties.
Kind of a newer introduction.
Yeah, it is. And so that's one that we've had a lot of success with for people who, again, are looking for a pop of color throughout the front of their garden. But, it doesn't get, people picture butterfly bushes, the classic butterfly bushes get huge.
8 by 8.
Yeah, but these are a very dwarf, compact butterfly bush, comes in a lot of different colors. And so, lo and behold, that's kind of, you can get white, pink, purple, and blues and a lot of different colors.
Yeah.
And so those are just a few of my favorites. But again, I could go on for a lot longer than we're going to go on for.
And we'll talk more and more about plants.
Sure.
I agree with all of his picks there. I think those are great options. I mean, Japanese maples, like you said, I mean, the size range from, hardly ever above 20 feet.
Sure.
Down to a foot to 2 feet.
Yeah.
I mean, and that I always like Japanese maples because you can use them in containers. You can put them on a front porch. So if you got a no space garden or a very low space garden, then they work for you. But they're definitely a very low maintenance plant and a great focal point for your landscape. I think I'll probably be a little bit on the boring side as far as my number one plant that I always recommend, and that's because I know you can find it across the country, and it's Nandina. It's got a little bit of, probably it's an older fashioned plant. It's been around for a long time. It might have some negative connotations. There's some that spread a little bit. So some people have said they can be a little bit invasive, but there are a few varieties that I love. Nandina Firepower is one of my all-time go-tos. If you're looking for, hey, I just need something. I can't get anything to grow here. They can grow in sun, even a little bit of shade. They get the best coloring in the sun. I mean, they call them Firepower Nandina because in the winter they turn bright red.
Yeah.
It's a little gumdrop shape, doesn't get very big, 3x2. So it fits a lot of different looks. There's also Gulfstream Nandina. There's been a lot of new introductions on that side too that have more red growth when the new comes out. There's that lemon lime one that's a little bit more on the chartreuse side. So Nandinas are a good one because especially if you're just getting into gardening and you really want a low maintenance plant that you really don't have to mess with, I love Nandina.
Trust me, when we have customers that ask, like, hey, what is the hardiest plant you could pick? We don't want to, it's a tough spot. We've lost a lot of things. Nandina is definitely one of the go-tos. So.
And I think also low maintenance, a lot of people don't want to prune much. I mean, Osmanthus Goshiki is a great option. You don't have to prune it much, but you can if you want it a little bit more tight and compact, you can. Nandina, almost you shouldn't prune to some degree. Truly. It's a little bit more of a natural look. I think it looks better, more naturalized, so don't prune them unless they get a little wonky on you. But other than that, I mean, I love Nandina. Indian Hawthorn is another one of my go-tos. If you don't have deer issues, then Indian Hawthorn are like my kind of full sun azalea.
Absolutely.
Love azaleas. Actually can be pretty low maintenance azaleas. But they bloom in the spring when nothing else is really blooming. They're evergreen. They've got a thick kind of waxy leaf.
Sure.
Dome shaped plant. Don't get really big. So it's a great foundation plant slash, kind of mass planting that you can kind of mass plant out there. So love Indian hawthorn.
And in this area, it can deal with sandy soils. I mean,
Right.
very versatile plant.
I think hollies and boxwoods are kind of in that same group, especially when we're talking about like the soft leaf hollies, like a compacta holly or a Hellerai holly or a soft touch holly. Then you get into all the boxwoods. Boxwoods can have some issues, but if you find a good variety that works in your area, that you got a little bit of shade, it's a great kind of low maintenance plant. And then of course, with that, I think grasses are great. Grasses,
Absolutely.
I mean, especially in our area where we've got a lot of, we're near the Chesapeake Bay, we've got a lot of water around us. Grasses fit the look, but they
Absolutely.
also are pretty low maintenance.
For sure.
I know y'all use them a lot in landscape.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, I always tell people, one of the scenarios, again, low maintenance is a very popular topic. And so, we do a few commercial sites where they don't have irrigation, and we will try to plant grasses and those, those hollies, like you mentioned. I mean, those are the things that we'll plant because if they can get established, within those first couple months, I mean, the watering needs and the maintenance and care on them is so minimal that, when we do use them in those type of settings, we use those for that exact reason because of their low maintenance, how hardy they are and how little issues they have. So I always say, that's, a pretty good barometer to how low maintenance it can be.
Yeah, and the last one I'll throw out, and we don't talk about perennials a ton. We'll get into it probably here and there about how we use perennials in our landscapes and what we kind of see. But hellebores or Linton rose are super, super durable plant. I mean, you can grow those in containers, very, very dry, shady areas. They've been known to do pretty well. So hellebores, Linton rose is a good one to look up as well. If it grows in your area, it's a great perennial.
Absolutely. Obviously, plant choices and things like that are, important, which we just touched on, but even like how you design a garden can really make it low maintenance. I mean, if you really pay attention to, and let me say, nothing stops growing. We always tell people that too. But if you do look at a mature height of something, it'll start to top out, at certain heights. And so when you're designing your landscape, you look at things like window height, because what you don't want to do is have something that grows up over the window that you have to constantly have to cut. And so not only your plant choice, but how you design and kind of lay out that garden. And one of my favorite ways to do it is kind of layer it down, right?
Yep.
So, talking about like a front foundation, okay? Probably the most popular landscaping request.
Of course.
Front foundations and stuff, curb appeal. So when you layer that down, we start with, usually an evergreen along the back of the house. Don't want something that's going to defoliate or, lose all its leaves in the wintertime and look bare. So we'll do an evergreen. And so, we kind of layer it down from there. So depending on the depth of the bed, you might be able to get 2 layers, maybe even 3 layers.
Right.
Where, again, going back on what we talked about a little bit with foliage color, if you can pick contrasting foliages that will kind of complement each other well, and then you kind of layer it down from there, picking things that aren't going to get too big or overgrown, because when they do start to grow together or grow on top of each other based upon your spacing and things like that, that's going to create a lot more maintenance for you. So that's what I always tell people. Maintenance is as much as it is about plant choice, it's how you lay it out and how you do things like that. And then, like you said, I have, perennials are always something that in theory, they sound so good. And I know we use a lot of terms, but perennials are something that you plant once and then they come back each year. They do go dormant in the wintertime, but, they are a little bit more maintenance in the sense of like when they do start to go dormant, you have to cut them back or, some have to be deadheaded and do some things like that. But I do love using pockets of perennials to have, it's hard to replicate that type of color and that type of pop of color.
And they can cover some space too.
Oh, absolutely.
Which I think is great. I mean, when it gets to low maintenance gardening, sometimes you want to just cover some ground space.
Absolutely.
I mean, we talk about mulching. Mulching can be a fair amount of maintenance. I mean, it's great for the plants. I think it finishes off the bed. But if you just had to top dress the front edges just to make it look good because everything else is covered in plant material, that's even better.
Yep.
And that really cuts down on the maintenance. Now, it takes time to get there.
Sure.
But having some of those plants that just cover space is super important.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, that's what, again, using ground covers and using perennials. One of my favorite perennials from a low maintenance standpoint. And again, you got to have some space to let it go.
Right.
But Black-eyed Susan, Rudbeckia,
Awesome one.
that's a great one. Can grow in a lot of different environments. Very tough, very hardy plant. And again, though, it'll cover some ground. And a couple years in, you're going to have a blanket of Black-eyed Susan. But at the same time, again, going back to thinking about it from a maintenance standpoint, you don't want to put that in a really tight area where it's going to start mixing and growing, unless that's the aesthetic you're going for, kind of a natural look. But if you do want to keep it low maintenance, making sure you have some space for it to grow, and just kind of thinking through those types of things when you're making your plant choices.
Right. Yeah, and I think, speaking of a foundation planting, I mean, you might be doing other landscaping around your yard, and if you have a big space, covering some of that space up is, I think of like Parsons or Andor juniper.
Sure.
I mean, those are both great shrubs because they only get about 3 to 4 to 5 feet tall, but they can cover 6 to 7 feet of ground space.
Absolutely.
I mean, they can get super wide, and sometimes you're just looking for that. You're looking for those options. So, talk to your experts. Certainly find out what shrubs will work best for you in those situations. There's a lot of great perennials. I mean, we didn't talk about annuals. You brought it up, which is a great point, which sometimes we use terminology that might kind of go right over the top of some people. Annuals, you're right. You plant annually. It sounds like it would come back each year, but you plant annuals each year. Perennials come back every year. I typically tend to go perennials more in the backyard, just because wherever that perennial root base is, you can't plant anything on top of it. But there are some very low maintenance annuals, and annuals give you a lot of pop of color, and that's really what we'll talk about it more and more in the future episodes. But annuals are great, always saving a little space for a couple pockets of color in your front.
Exactly. And I mean, again, that's where it all comes down to, maintenance is in the eye of the beholder, because if you think of annuals, you have to replace them every, for the seasons. You have your warm season and cool season annuals. So that sounds like a lot of maintenance.
Right.
But from an actual maintenance standpoint, once they're in the ground, it's about as low maintenance as it gets.
And they basically bloom until
and it just nothing can give you that much color with that little of maintenance, other than just you have to change them out, every 6 months or so. So obviously that is a little bit more maintenance, but it's a one-time thing, once or twice a year, and you get that pop of color that is really hard to replicate with anything else.
And if the rest of your landscape garden is low maintenance, and that's your only maintenance, then it's still pretty low maintenance.
Yeah.
And I mean, we talked about mulch a little bit and trying to get low maintenance there by covering some ground space and letting your plants kind of consume some of your bed space. But I know y'all use a lot of rock.
Absolutely.
And I think hardscapes / rock as a substitute for mulch is a great option, and I'll let you explain a little bit more about it because you know more about it than I do.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, again, going on with this theme, that's something that has become increasing. Rock used to be kind of very few and far between when I first started doing landscape. We may have it on, a couple jobs a year, and now I'd say at least some rock is on at least 60 to 70% of our jobs now. And so, and in some, we've even done the entire landscape in rock. And so obviously there's a more upfront cost with rock. It's more expensive than mulch, but what you do get is you don't have to do that remulching each year.
It's always
so
there.
When you talk about maintenance, and mulch can wash around with heavy rains, and, mulch has its own issues. Again, very important, but nonetheless, it's a little bit more maintenance heavy than rock. But it's still, even with rock, when going back to the no maintenance side of things, you have to keep the rock clean. If you let the rock get a bunch of leaves and debris that settle down in it, those break down into organic matter, and then, they can grow weeds and stuff. So I always tell people keep the rock clean, but other than that, you don't have to replace it each year. So the cost is really an initial upfront cost. And then in theory, you're pretty much done. I mean, you may want to do a refresher 10 years down the line, but, with mulch, you're probably, doing that refresher every year or so. So rock has become increasingly popular. And again, rock is also very functional. It's not just aesthetically. I mean, I love rock. If you ever look at my house, you can tell how much I love rock. But it's not only an aesthetic choice, but it can also be a very functional choice if you have low-lying areas, drainage problems and things like that.
For sure. And I think what always pops into my head as a vision of what a low maintenance garden is, like water-wise plants, rock, kind of a deserty kind of look. It doesn't have to be the case for sure. I mean, it can be a lot of different things, but rock has become very popular and certainly cuts down on the maintenance of having to mulch every year.
Absolutely. I mean, and even, we talk about a focal point, we talked about obviously using Japanese maples and things like that, but I don't know if you could find a lower maintenance focal point than a boulder or something like that. You know, you'd literally never have to touch it again. Yeah. So
if you got a spot that can't grow a plant, put a boulder there.
Exactly.
That's a great option.
So, I mean, that's, you can accomplish a lot of different things with using rocks in different settings, and that's become increasingly popular, and I think that's exactly why.
Yep. Great. You got any other questions, Alex?
I do, yes. Are there any opportunities to still be creative with low maintenance? Maybe like using containers or window boxes?
Yeah, I mean, the possibilities in gardening itself are just unending. So to get creative with low maintenance gardening, for sure. I mean, that organic trend. I won't say trend. It's something that we want to be in. We want to always be in organics and increase the organic use. But that started kind of a different kind of look at how you use your garden space. Rain barrels and different types of water gardens and rain gardens and all of that started to come about, and that all kind of works into a low maintenance kind of avenue as well. So certainly getting creative with your low maintenance gardening is there's lots of opportunities. I mean, you mentioned window baskets and containers. Containers, you can do kind of two different ways. You could put, if you've got no landscape and you want to do containers, or you want a container that you don't have to worry about too much, put some very water-wise plants. I mean, succulents and cactus. There are hardy varieties that can stay outside. There are, a lot of different solutions there. There's also water bowls. A lot of people don't know this, but you can fill a container, you can plug the hole at the bottom, and then you can fill it with water, and there's plants that'll grow straight in water.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, there you're just changing out the water every so often so it doesn't get gross, but there's a lot of different opportunities and tons of ways to get creative.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, especially, more on containers when we talk about like landscape, is we'll have people that have these patios or these pool decks or whatever the case may be, and they don't necessarily have a lot of space for plantings and shrubs and things like that, but they still want that kind of to soften it up a little bit. That's a lot of times what plant material can do for areas, especially when you have a lot of rock or you have a lot of hardscapes like, patty concrete or decks, pavers, whatever the case may be. And so you can use containers. And again, it all comes down to choices. If you, and what aesthetic you want to achieve, and a lot of times that will dictate how low maintenance something can be. But again, it's kind of the same concept as annuals. Yeah, you may have to change them out sometimes, or, at least, parts of them out because of the, type of plant material it is. But you do that once or twice a year, and you get pops of color that are going to last out throughout the entire season when a lot of things aren't doing that. And so I think that can be a low maintenance solution to areas that maybe people don't have a lot of space for gardening. And the opposite of trying to cover a bunch of ground with perennials, they don't have any ground to cover, but they still want to kind of use those kind of creative solutions. And so, again, I think a lot of it comes back to, how you kind of design and lay things out, but then also your plant choices, like we've talked about, are what's going to lend itself to be such a low maintenance process.
Yeah, and it's sometimes the small things too, like where's the closest hose?
Right.
I mean, if it's not low maintenance,
Especially
if you got to drag the
containers.
hose 100 feet to get to a container. So if you've got easy, access to water, and then it's not very low maintenance because you go out there and water it every once in a while. So there's a lot of different thoughts and pieces and parts of this, but I certainly think this gets people pointing in the right direction. I think low maintenance gardening has a lot of opportunities and a lot of different styles and looks. A lot of different types of plants that you can use there. I also think with low maintenance gardening, putting plants in the proper places helps.
Absolutely.
We'll talk about in the future in different episodes, like, hey, don't plant an azalea in full sun. It likes a little bit of shade. Well, for a low maintenance garden, certainly don't do that. If you plant a plant that needs a little bit of shade and you plant it in full sun, you're not creating a low maintenance situation. You're creating a higher maintenance situation. Not to say that it can't be done. That's what we'll talk about in the future, but certainly, putting plants in the right place and talking to your local garden centers and talking to the landscape experts. And I will say there's nothing more than a low maintenance garden than having us or any landscape company install it for you. I mean, when you come home and your landscape's changed, there's nothing better than that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like I said, and again, we can design and like I said, you're again going back to just your local experts, whether that's a landscape division, a garden center, but that you hit the nail on the head. I mean, and again, a lot of that goes into, not to harp back on some of the things we've already talked about, but low maintenance is all encompassing. I mean, even just the type of soil prep you do, which is where,
Right.
having somebody, either consulting with somebody who understands that process, or having somebody who really knows how to do it the right way. Because how you prep and the soil amendments you add in, the compost, the perlite, whatever the case may be, and that's all specific to your soil contents. Whether you have
Right.
clay or sandy soil, all of that's going to dictate what soil amendments you need, and that's what's going to make having the plant set up for success is what is really going to create a low maintenance garden. If you don't prep the
for
soil
sure.
correctly, you're going to have issues with the plants, and that's the opposite of low maintenance. And so that's, like you said, having somebody else do that is obviously a very low maintenance option, or at the very least, just consulting with somebody who really understands that process and the importance of it. Because a lot of times the soil amendments and the things you don't see, you don't see that. That's all underneath the mulch, the rock, whatever. But that's certainly arguably the most important part of the entire process if you really want something to thrive.
Invest as much as you do in your plants into your soil. It's where those root systems are going to live for its entire lifespan. So definitely want to do that when it comes down to your soil amendments, your initial plant food, how you feed your plants and how you water it, and then the mulch to kind of top it all off. Very, very important parts of keeping your plants thriving and getting them to the best start possible.
For sure.
And hey, like we mentioned in the first episode, you'll have your trials and tribulations.
Absolutely.
You'll have your issues, but that's where we learn, and that's where we get better, and that's what's brought us here today.
Absolutely.
So thanks again for tuning in to Bros of Gardening. I'm Mike Westfall with Daniel Van Dyke and Alex behind the scenes. I don't think we have got any more questions. So next week we'll be talking about winter gardening. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.